Bodies.
Bodies.
Male bodies. Hey, this is Murray Campbell.
And this is Mariah. Hey y'all.
We're we're gonna talk today about male body representation in entertainment and like most specifically video games. So when talking about the representation of males in entertainment, there are a few aspects that are involved, such as the weight, the height, the race, the hair, build, and the height. I guess I said height twice. No. And these are all like aspects of the human male body, right? Oftentimes, if any of these aspects is emphasized past the average, it becomes the defining characteristic of the character in the narrative. And this can sometimes alienate the player, and more often than not, we're getting the same characters that we've been getting in every other game. So what is the average, right? So while the large muscular soldier character type is still prevalent, games more frequently have like this type of main character. This is Nathan Drake from the Uncharted series. He's got a slim build, athletic physique, short brown hair, light to medium facial hair. See that? And he's white. Here's some more of the average. I mean, you can see this is just a picture, but it really is this average is actually like very prevalent in video games, right?
So why is this a norm in games to have this like white male with short brown hair and a slim physique as the typical main character? So in terms of the schools of thought that we've covered, we can place one of the reasons for this in the concept of ethical egoism. So the companies making these games are wholly concerned with their own self-interest, which is basically making as much money as possible by reaching the most users. So they make this average protagonist whom they think is pandering to what they perceive as their primary audience. In this way, games are not being inclusive to everyone and fall to the same pitfalls as ethical egoism. People can feel alienated by this single representation, and this lowers their self-esteem by not looking like this person that they keep playing as in games. So the lack of diverse representation of like diverse bodies, and when they are included, a lot of the times they're stereotypes, and we can see through research that this can be damaging to a player's self-esteem and self-worth. So why is this bad? So as I was saying before, in this certain study by Bartlett and Harris, they state that in their research that focuses on like body emphasis in games, the ideal body image is typically, for men, is represented by a muscular and fit build. So they also find in their study that when players are exposed to this ideal muscular or trim body type, it lowers players' self-esteems and makes them feel bad about their own body. So if players are only exposed to this norm as a benchmark for themselves, it impacts their self-esteem in a negative way.
Yeah.
Okay. So in order to lower the effects of this that we have seen from this research, it's important that games start including positive body representations of all types of male bodies. But as it stands now, many portrayals are only contributing to things negatively than helping it. So the standard treatment of these characters that tend to have differing body types than this normal build is that they're usually stereotypes, and it's belittling to the integrity of these diverse characters. Okay, so example. So these are two fighters from the Street Fighter series, and while they're strong, they're good fighters, they still represent a lot of standard stereotypes for larger characters in games. So Bob, all of his moves are named after food. Rufus is portrayed as a gross and repellent character, and Bob also has the explanation that he got fat was to use it as a handicap in fighting, which is just really bad. So, so these characters themselves are portrayed in the normative way of belittling larger characters. We can see this in film too, where large characters are viewed as undesirable, usually unable to get the girl, or the end of a fart joke. So we see this in films like Eddie Murphy's Norbit, or even Paul Blart Mall Cop. And so we can see these types of characters are always just being played for laughs and not really being respected correctly.
All right, so apart from weight, I mentioned earlier that race is another aspect of the male body that when it's presented outside of the norm, when it's a race other than white, it becomes sort of a defining characteristic of that character, and usually devolves into stereotypes of that race. Racial issues are typically either overlooked or handled poorly in video game narratives and worlds, like I was saying. If the game has mechanical advantages or disadvantages for being certain races, these are often reduced to stereotypes of that particular race, such as in the Elder Scrolls series, there is a race called the Red Guards, and they have racial bonuses to certain stat distributions. They get bonuses to a stat called Strength, and penalties to a stat called Intelligence, which is like very like stereo. And the Red Guards are the series is like race of sub-Saharan Africans, right? Sidney Fussell talked about this. And she said there's a real fear in engaging with like race/racism in games that leads to many developers either omitting them completely or hoping palette swap options will suffice. And in 2014, which was when they wrote this, it's absurd for racial awareness and a more evolved understanding of racism to be dismissed as niche, right? So another example of this type of stereotypical reduction is in Grand Theft Auto 5, and one of the three main characters, his name is Franklin. He's a black male from downtown Los Santos, which is the video game equivalent of Los Angeles. And this could have been like a great opportunity to explore the harsh racial climate of being a black male in a city. The game exploited the stereotypes of black people in the Compton area for fun gameplay moments. And these like underhandedly made statements about black people that were racist underneath the game's supposedly satirical narrative. Actually all people in the game that belong to these marginalized minorities were consistently portrayed through stereotypes, and the whole game uses this kind of stereotypical reduction of minorities for like the butt of its jokes, but it doesn't do anything further or past that to say why it's wrong. There's no subtext, no subversion. It's just like very blatantly racist and sexist. So here's a good example of a game that addresses race without reducing it to stereotypes is Telltale's The Walking Dead. And Fussell talks about this. And she says, protagonist Lee Everett, a rare black everyman, and redneck Papa Bear Kenny attempt to break into a locked door in a barn. Kenny asks if Lee knows how to pick the lock because you're, urban. And Lee responds with a frustrated, "Come on, man," before a guilty and embarrassed Kenny quickly apologizes, and the two come up with a different plan for entering the room. And then Lee and Kenny like each other very much. Sidney went on to say, Lee and Kenny like each other very much, but they still harbor assumptions about each other based on race. And that's how it is in real life. We all have relationships with racism. We overcome it, capitulate to it, conceal it, etc. And Kenny awkwardly tried to excuse and sanitize his own racism, but he's no villain. He's human. He makes mistakes and occasionally says stupid shit. The Walking Dead doesn't trot out racism just to remind us that racism is bad. It uses racism to show how identities affect the dynamics of a relationship. Identities that the game observes and engages and doesn't colorblindingly ignore. So, one aspect of certain games is that they have character creators, where in the beginning of the game you get to um, basically like use sliders and other values to modify certain parts of the body and the face, and like you can choose hair and all of that, right? So character creators are cool because they give players a much improved agency over the look of their character, um, and these character creators might give more options for um, they basically they give more options for diverse protagonists in our games by allowing us to control the gender, race, weight, and like all of the physical features of that main protagonist. And this can allow people to identify with the narrative more easily if they choose to play as a character like themselves that they create. Um, but at the same time, we must also be careful with these character creators as developers, because as character creators still have like these technological limitations. There's only so bodies like in like 3D models can only be modified, like pushed and pulled so much before they break and look all weird and the polygons get messed up. Um, and so developers in character creators will avoid this by having like minimum and maximum values for all of the different sliders that you can modify the different parts of the body with. So this is like a limitation of technology, but it's still saying something about what a body can and cannot be. It's a statement made by the game about the human body, right? So with character creators, maybe the stakes are even higher because there's this added expectation that the player has that they will be able to create the character that they want, and they will be represented uh, fairly, right? So a really good example of this is Fallout 4, which like gives you options for like all the facial features, skin color. There's a bunch of different hair types. There's different kinds of makeup that you can apply to both genders. Scars, facial scars, and you can even modify the build of the body, like make the character fatter or more muscular or skinnier. And so that's like a pretty cool and like offers a pretty diverse range of possible character types. But then there's like Destiny is another game that has a character creator in the beginning, but that character creator is just okay, and it makes sense because Destiny wanted to have a more specific array of possible character archetypes in its game without having anyone look too strange. But at the same time, you can't modify any of the body in the game, and you are limited to only a few hairstyle options and races and genders, right?
Okay, so as Murray was saying, and from various studies that you can see on our Works Cited page at the end, is that it's been observed that players feel greater sympathy and more engagement in the game into their characters if they've created that character themselves. So if players can start making characters that are honest depictions of themselves and real world people, not only could players feel less alienated, but perhaps they could even gain confidence seeing someone like themselves like achieving a lot of amazing things. Okay, so how can we fix all these issues that we've been talking about? So, for starters, just include more diverse characters in your games.
Yeah, having main characters and main protagonists that are of different worldviews and like racial backgrounds is a really great way of diversifying video games.
Yeah. Secondly, if you're going to include diverse characters, don't make them stereotypes. Actually respect them as as people, and you can achieve that by hiring writers from these diverse backgrounds and also playtesting with people who are also from these diverse backgrounds. So it's not just your weird perception that doesn't understand this background.
Games that have done this correctly in the past have gone as far as to include those people from these backgrounds in multiple parts of the development process. So they bring them in to like ask them questions about, hey, like, are we doing this? Are we representing this character in the most honest and respectable way possible? And that like came only to the game's benefit and made the game a lot more inclusive for a wider audience. Um, so that's all for that. Here's our
Yeah.
works cited, and we'll see you later. Bye now.